So for this sketch, I started working on Procreate. Recently, I've been loving Procreate to do my penciling just because it's friendlier than Photoshop, especially when doing backgrounds. I'm working over my approved sketch from the editors. I usually do a very loose sketch just to get the composition and the right angle down. Right now, I'm not focusing on the anatomy, but when I'm doing the pencils, as if I'm doing right now, I'm making sure all my anatomy, my angle is working properly, just by having the under sketch as a very loose reference. I usually use Magic Poser just to recreate my scenes once the sketch is approved, and posing those 3D characters and doing a basic lighting before I start this stage of penciling. I highly recommend just going prepared before rendering in detail with your characters with as much reference as possible. It could be just taking your own pictures, gathering pictures from Pinterest, Google, or even posting in 3D, whatever programs you feel comfortable with. I mostly use Magic Poster just because that's the 3D program I feel more comfortable with, and they have like a good library of 3D characters that you can pose. And once I have all my characters posing and the lighting done, then I use that as a reference just to render everything. I like to keep my sketching quite simple. Not simple in the terms of detail, but simple in my lines, just to keep open lines on my areas and not to over render with a lot of cross hatching. I did that when I first started, just try to achieve more volume by cross hatching, but nowadays I really like achieving that volume with just ink wash, which I know I will be using later on. So right now I'm just giving enough information so that I know which volumes I'll be rendering later on, but trying to leave as much open room as I can just to be able to have the freedom to render with ink wash later on. Another perk of doing these covers, or the things that I enjoy, is having the freedom to do my interpretation on these characters. So for example, on the shoes, like I always try to picture or imagine if I was wearing those shoes, like will I what will I like those shoes to be like? Like always try to imagine if those shoes, if I go to a store and I will have to buy those shoes, like will I buy them? Like are they cool enough for me to buy, and sometimes things go over the top, and I like to go crazy with the designs, but it's always with the mindset of like, if this was a real product, how will I feel about it? Will I like to see those shoes in the store? Will I consider to buy it for myself or someone else? So for this instance, I was like, okay, so Robin is a young dude, with a certain personality. So I'm trying to give the proper shoes to the character just by adding my own flavor to them. And I try to have this mindset just about everything that I do when I'm doing a cover for the characters. So I do the same thing with Batman with his belt, or anything that I can get away with, because sometimes we have to stick to the suits that they're using on the correct timeline. But I try to get my designer here and there whenever I can. Now we are moving on to Batman. Fun. So again, I have my basic sketch, but right now I'm using the Magic Poster just to make sure I have my anatomy and my angle just right. adjusting proportions where there need to be adjusting proportions. That is one of the big perks of working digitally on Procreate, is that you can always adjust proportions instead of erasing and redrawing. This is the right stage to work those kinks, just because you are in the beginning stages of your image. Try to work out proportions on the inking stage will be much harder, because you're now taking it on a traditional medium, and traditional mediums are less forgiving for editing. So that's why I like to work digitally whenever I'm doing pencils, just because I know I can do quick edits much faster and easier. Another big key element on this is just deciding my light sources from the start. So I always try to keep it fairly basic, just with one or two light sources. It's rare for me to do a three light source on my characters and my scenes. I don't know, I feel less is more, and it's just like there's no reason to overcomplicate. At the end of the day, it's all about capturing a mood on the scene, not about showing off how much or how many lights I can handle. So I just keep it simple, just one light for now, and I know I'll be having a rim light later on. Another important thing is understanding how lighting affects different materials. So, for example, Batman trousers are made of a latex type of material, which in essence will have a different reflection than from the usual suit that he has, which will be more of a traditional cotton material. And it's by understanding and doing enough research of how those materials behave on light that you can approach your drawings with much more confidence, just by understanding and drawing it over and over again and having just enough reference material before rendering. And again, right there, I was trying to add some seams, but it just didn't look right. Again, I always try to find the balance of what is believable but what looks right. And sometimes we forget that we are idolizing these characters. So in a way, making them too believable sometimes just doesn't make them look as heroic. So sometimes less is more, and just by removing those seams, the character looks more sleek. And that's just a personal preference. Now for the background, I decided to freehand this background, just again keeping it simple with one vanishing point. I wanted this scene to have a background that will be a character unto itself, just because Gotham City has so much character in it that I always like to give that gritty feel and some of the dirty feel that it has. So I knew from the start that I wanted to be its own character. I try to avoid like doing very technical drawings, just because I just don't have the patience to do a lot of like straight lines here and there, even though this one require more than the amount that I'm comfortable with. But adding those details, those organic lines, those tubes, those pipes there, gives the whole scene much more a much more dynamic feel, and at the end it gives it so much character. So I usually approach these backgrounds by having done a lot of reference searching beforehand. I remember I did a lot of reference from the Batman Arkham games just because I think they capture the essence of Gotham City so well in those games. So I remember I did a lot of research from those games. And for the background, I usually focus on adding elements that will reinforce the composition around the characters. So those pipes on the right, I added them because not only it gives character to the background, but in a way they frame my characters. And of course, I couldn't leave this piece without a neon sign. I just wanted to give this noir vibe to the whole scene. So I knew from the start that I wanted to have a neon sign somewhere. And again, with those stairs, I'm again reinforcing just the composition, just adding foreground elements to bring the reader in. And that's one of the rules that I always try to follow whenever I'm doing a cover, is just to have my foreground elements, midground, and background. So those elements on the left, that window and the stairs, that will be my foreground element. And usually foreground elements have like a darker value, but it helps me to bring the reader in and make him feel like he's right there with us, just paying attention to those characters. And that's one of the big advantages of doing digital. It's just that I throw many things at the wall and not everything sticks, but being able to go back and forth and try different elements in such a fast rate, I think it's a big perk from working digitally. Now, from those background elements, I'm keeping it fairly simple, just adding enough information that I know I'll be rendering it ink wash later on. But I'm not focusing on adding a lot of detail on those just because I know I will treat them as just shapes that will be somewhat reinforcing the background elements for the composition, but they won't have a lot of detail. They will be mostly just basic big blocking shapes. And the piece is almost ready. What I'll be doing next is just I take this sketch, put it in Photoshop, and I brighten my lines so that you can barely see them. And I do a printout on my printer, and I'll be inking manually.